welcome back. This next conversation is hosted by the Stein Institute of Policy and Politics, and it explores how we can sustain and expand investment in research and innovation, the lifeblood of higher education and progress. And leading our discussion is Dr. Diana Burley, who is currently the Senior Vice President for Research at the Brookings Institution. But we are so proud, as she served as the Vice Provost for Research and Innovation, the Chief Research and Innovation Officer here, has written over 100 publications. Well, and that was, I haven't even checked. I don't know if we added on to any of those. But please welcome Dr. Burley for this conversation. I think I'm on. Yes. Well, welcome back to American University. Once an eagle, always an eagle.
Great, thank you.
We're so happy to have you here. And this is such an important conversation. When we think about all the various angles you've seen about this topic, about the interest in investment in research and innovation, we've seen so many things certainly under attack recently. We think about how are we, and I love that your titles were research and innovation, and why it's the topic panel today, because that innovation part is so important. And the conversation about research investment, I don't know if you agree, it's at a bit of a crossroads here. So public trust, funding pressures, and the rise of AI are kind of reshaping priorities. We've touched on some of those topics today. So I really want to start off, Dr. Burley, by asking you what excites you most and what concerns you about the current moment of research and innovation. And now you're at a private sector, a think tank, a nonprofit group, but you've also seen it from higher ed. So what are your initial thoughts on this?
Well, first, thank you for having me. It's nice to be back. I've been gone all of 6 weeks, so it's nice to be home again. Anytime there's a transformation in a sector or in the activity of a sector, it presents us with an opportunity. And so I really see this moment as just that, as an opportunity for us to rethink the way that we approach research in the think tank space, in the academic space, and to consider why we're doing what we do, right? We often talk about research and we talk about impact and innovation and all those things, but it often goes away when we get down into actually doing the work, and there's not always a very direct connection. And I think with all of the changes in the higher ed space and the research space, it's really causing us to think very critically about impact and what we are going to do to really change the world in whatever way we think is possible, but based in fact, based in evidence, based in research and scholarship, but really leveraging the work that we do for impact on society. And that's really the moment that we are in at this time.
I mean, it's an intense moment, of course, but we've seen challenges before. But you have a new perspective now at Brookings. How do research institutions need to evolve their partnerships and funding strategies to kind of remain impactful? Have you seen that conversation happening?
Yes, so we talk about this literally every minute of every day, and thinking about the audience. So Brookings is very much focused on influencing policymakers, decision makers, really thinking about the legislative branch in particular. And so one of the things that we talk about daily is how do we get this research in front of legislators? How do we actually influence policymakers? And who are the people that we need to influence, that we need to see our research in order to get to them? And recognizing that decision makers, influencers, their profile has changed. The generational changes, so we don't just want to influence policymakers today, we want to influence them tomorrow. And so we're recognizing that the way that different generations approach research and evidence is different. And so we have to evolve our strategies, not just about conducting the research, but about identifying how we get our research into the hands of the people who can act on it.
I think that's so important, and helping them understand new audiences. We started our day talking about the data that we did in our most recent youth poll, and I think we've kind of adopted that practice because, to your point, we want these people making decisions in this representative democracy to have information at their hands. And I wonder, with federal and state research dollars, they're under strain. And yet the private sector is increasing its footprint in innovative funding. So how does this changing mix affect the independence and direction of university research? I mean, this is evolving, and the stakeholders might be taking on different roles.
Yeah. Independence is a real serious issue that we have to keep at the forefront of our minds. You know, at Brookings, our little tagline is quality, independence, impact. And the independence piece is so vitally important, especially as we see this transition toward more private sector sources of funding for research, because it really takes additional effort to ensure that if you are being funded by a private company to do the research, that you don't allow them to put their thumb on the scale, because they have a particular interest, they're funding the research, and even when they believe that they want an independent study, they still want the results to kind of lean in the direction that that is beneficial for them. So it really means that the onus is on us as researchers, whether think tanks or academics, to ensure that we stick with our principles to make that research objective and not sway to the funding source. And it's increasingly difficult because federal sources are shifting. And so we are moving more toward the private sector, but with work in the beginning to set ground rules, to set parameters, you're better able to maintain that independence.
And even if some of these things are shifting, the people actually doing the research matter as well. So what do universities and institutes of higher learning have to do to make sure they're creating that next generation of researchers? And how are we supposed to invest in young people to make sure that they are, to your point, with evolving technology, with evolving funding sources, that we're creating spaces for them to become the researchers of tomorrow?
Yeah. You know, it starts with the research and the methods and the methodology and really understanding how to conduct the research. That never changes, right? To make sure that you develop an expertise in the way that you conduct the research, regardless of what technology you use or what the external environment is like, that rigor has to be there. And in particular, as we look at the environment where there is so much information overload and there's so much question around the value of expertise and the value of truth, it is even more incumbent upon us to ensure that our methods are rigorous. So the faculty members who are training the early career staff members and the students have to ensure that they are imparting those skills and capabilities. And then on top of that, we can focus on how do we enable more efficient operations with advanced technologies? How do we ensure that we understand the nuances of those technologies and when to use them and when not, and when to disclose that we have used them and in what way? And then also helping them understand how to translate the research for different audiences so that they can make an impact on the community and stakeholders that they're interested in.
I think so often we look at things from a domestic lens or perspective, but it's emerging that we're also competing globally, not just on discovery, but of speed of application. And so how can universities better integrate research and workforce preparation, knowing that they're also competing globally on a lot of these things?
Well, I would say, and this really is no different than preparing people for the workforce, for a global workforce. We have to first recognize that the world does not exist by these artificial boundaries that, in our case, there's an ocean, but these artificial boundaries really are spanned when we talk about the technology and the way that the information digital infrastructure allows us to engage as a global society. So knowing that it is important that we become familiar with the ways that culture, that regulation, that policy and practice around the globe influence the way that we either conduct our work or apply our work. There are some instances where there are policies that have been developed collectively around the world with different countries coming together, and then there's other places where they haven't been. But it is our responsibility as researchers to ensure that we have that awareness, that there may be geographic differences based on those policies that we have to take into consideration.
Dr. Burley, I have to admit, I didn't go through your whole biography because we have an hour. So when I think of all the different things you've done, I'm trying to piece together some of the experiences and some of the expertise you have. And one is you've written about cybersecurity and digital transformation. So what lessons from those fields apply and how we cultivate a modern research enterprise? And from that work that you've done, how do you see it kind of weaving into this conversation?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that I would say, and this is something that if you're in the cybersecurity space, you know that you have to always be learning. It is something that is constantly evolving, not just because of what you're doing or might be interested in doing, excuse me, but also because there are adversaries and there are people who are out there leveraging advanced tools. So when we think about the modern research enterprise, we have to think in the same way. Thank you. That there has to be this desire to constantly be mindful of the environment and constantly be mindful of the resources and tools and things that are in the environment that we can take advantage of. It also means that we have to have a certain level of agility so that we are prepared to take in the new environment, the new relationships, the new opportunities, so that we can then leverage them to expand the work that we do, whether that is expanding the context, whether that is expanding the team that we are working with, or the tools that we are using. But it's really about this recognition that we have to be prepared to be constantly learning and moving. And remembering that agility is what matters most.
Well, it's interesting because I have to be honest, it's so much, there's so much information available to us with this information overload, with having access. When I think about how even just research done by individual students has changed over the years since I was at grad school here at American, like what is that access to information? How has that kind of made it more challenging, or is it? It's also been a benefit because we, have this information quicker and faster? And
well, and it's both. It's both, right? There is a democratization of information that we see around the world where people can participate in ways that they could not participate before. But it also means that we have to be very concerned and focused on ensuring that the research that we are producing is sound, because there is so much coming at people constantly. When you are fortunate enough to get their eyes on you and to get their attention, you want to make sure that the information that you are providing them, the research that you are providing them, is of the highest quality, is rigorous, because if it's not, you feed into this narrative that expertise is not important. And so it does put additional pressure on us to make sure that our work is strong, but it also provides us with opportunities to pull in more individuals into the research process. So I came in at the end of the last discussion and I heard you mention that you're a citizen archivist.
I am. And if you want information, just go to the National Archives. Well, the reality, I was watching too much reality TV, Dr. Burley, so I just thought I'd diversify a little bit. That was the impetus.
That's fair. That's
yeah.
great, though. But if you think about that from a research perspective, imagine how much that enables us to push forward in a way that doesn't require us, because it used to be just the members of the research team that were coding, right? That were translating the data. And now we have all of these other individuals who are contributing to cleaning the data, putting the data in there so that we can have more use. It means that we have to make sure we're training the citizen scientists, right?
And that there's levels of
and that there's levels,
checking.
exactly, there's levels of checking, but it opens the opportunity for much more. And so that's part of the beauty of this kind of environment where we can really think much bigger than we could in the past.
So in some ways it's empowering and enabling individuals, but you know, I always step back and have a concern when we're moving forward with something that we have to step back and say, what are the dangers to equity and inclusion when we're finding these advancements? So especially in research. So if billions are invested annually in research and development, yet the distribution favors maybe a small number of institutions, you know, what steps are needed to take to kind of democratize access to research funding and participation? Because I think about HBCUs or the tribal colleges, like how important is that in this conversation too, as we see these changes in funding?
Yeah. Access and equity in research and research funding has always been an issue, and for the foreseeable future will continue to be. And it is incumbent upon us who are participating in the system, whatever part of the system we are in, to ensure that we are asking questions that push those boundaries and that require us to bring in different voices. We need to make sure that, you know, there's this saying, you know, nothing about us without us. And that applies in the research space, because you cannot, especially when you're looking at questions around ethics and responsible use of technology, whether it's AI or any other type of technology, you cannot assume that you know what the questions are or what the issues might be for a variety of different audiences, or that you will be able to address all of those questions. And so it is really important that we enable researchers from different cultural backgrounds, from different geographic, ethnic, et cetera, backgrounds to participate in the process, because they will ask different questions. They will come at it with different perspectives, with different life experiences. And all of those inform the research enterprise. And so it is, in order to really have a holistic understanding of the space, you need to have a diverse set of voices at the table.
Let me ask you this, because it's interesting. You've had such an esteemed, you know, career moving around in this field. Like, what was the impetus that you wanted to go into this field or research? Like at what point do you think was the influence? Was it when you were young in school? Was it a certain mentor? Or why is this an important field for you to pursue?
Yeah. So I'll tell you a story about my grandmother. When I was in graduate school, and I went to Carnegie Mellon, and you know, I was focused on tech, computing sciences, and I was in graduate school in the late 90s. And that was the beginning of the World Wide Web, not the internet, but the web, like web pages and companies actually putting things on the web. And I remember coming home, my family's from Pittsburgh, and I remember going to see my grandmother one day after class, and I was really excited because I was telling her, oh, you know, Grandma, this is great. You're going to be able to do all these things online. You're going to be able to get your Social Security check and do all of this, you know, on the computer, and it's wonderful. And she looked at me and said, well, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. What
What's your grandmother's name?
Linda.
Linda. Oh, Linda.
And, you know, she says, but I need to go see my friend Bob, or whatever his name was, right? And there was a whole community of individuals that she engaged with as she went to the Social Security office. It wasn't just about the transaction. It was about the community. And that's what really pushed me, because it made me realize that in all of the discussions that I was having on campus every day, all day, we weren't talking about the people and the community and what they wanted or how all of these pieces fit together. We were all enamored by the capabilities of the technology. And that's when I knew that I needed to be in those rooms so that I could do both and, so that I could communicate about the amazing capabilities of these new technologies. But I could do it while also representing the voices of people in the community. And so my passion has always been about how do people shape technology and how does technology shape people and what is that interaction like? And whether preparing the workforce, whether conducting research, whether using the tools in research, that's where my passion has always been. And it just so happens that my career has grown up at the same time as this global digital infrastructure has grown up.
Well, and you've certainly capitalized on that and moved it forward. And you know, it's great for me because I've been here now about 6.5 years at AU's campus. I am constantly learning about colleagues who are doing incredible research work. Some of them are in the room today. And the other thing that's really important, I think, is that, you know, how are we, you know, making sure, you know, many argue sometimes that research too often remains in the lab. What mechanisms works best to bridge scholarship with real-world application? You mentioned getting it to the right audiences, but I think one of the jobs that we all have to do as peers and colleagues is to help amplify when that work is happening, so it doesn't just stay in the lab. So you get the research dollars, you're doing this important work, but how does the world know about that? Like, what are things that you saw while you were here at AU? How does Brookings, you know, tackle that with the amazing team that you have there?
Yeah. Well, you know, when we started this conversation, I started talking about impact, and that's where I go right back to, that it's really about making an impact. And so several years ago, when I was here at AU, colleagues and I came together and we started the Translating Research into Action Center track. And so those of you who are AU, you'll see posters and flyers around for SOAR seminars and, you know, societal outcomes, actionable research, and really what that Translating Research into Action Center is all about is harnessing the work that so many individual researchers here at AU were doing, not just to develop great research, but also to connect that research with their audiences, and saying, how can we ensure that this happens as a regular course so that every time people are conducting research, they are thinking about, how do I get this to the audience? And sometimes it is the researcher, and sometimes it's other members of their team, sometimes it's their partners in the community. So it's not always the same form or the same individuals, but it's a recognition that when you are conducting research that has an applied application, that you can actually take measurable steps toward getting that research out to the audience that you are trying to engage. So that's what we started at AU several years ago, and I know that track continues. At Brookings, we are very focused on not just identifying audiences, but on thinking about different ways of providing the research, whether they are in explainers, which we do a lot, which are really short versions of research that give you maybe a 1-page or a 2-page document, on creating videos and leveraging some of the new technologies so that we can communicate in different ways to different audiences, but a real recognition that the value of the research that is being conducted needs to that it has to get out there, right? That the value really lies in getting it to the audience.
Yes, and usable so people can actually make good use of all this incredible work that's being done. Since you've been at Brookings, is there opportunities for think tanks like the one that you're working at now to partner with universities? I know sometimes, what does that need to look like, and how can that be strengthened in these like challenging times, do you think?
Yes, so university partnerships are in my portfolio, so just give me a call. But partnerships really look like anything. It really comes down to a conversation about our goals, what we're trying to accomplish, and about the partners' goals, the university's goals, and coming together to say, we have these shared goals, and we have identified something that we believe we could do together that would help to amplify and help to move us forward. And sometimes that is speaker series and collaborating to bring together audiences around different topics. Sometimes that is executive education type programs. Sometimes it is, we have a partnership right now that we call Brookings Mountain West that is actually with UNLV, where we go out, our scholars go out and spend about a week at a time to engage with students, where we have a minor. Actually, it's called the Brookings Minor in Public Policy that students can take. But our scholars go out and they also engage with members of the community. They give community forums and really help to amplify the research that's being done to help benefit the Southern Nevada region. So there are all different kinds of relationships that we put together so that we can continue to move the ball forward, because that's really what it's all about.
Well, and when you see some of these funding structures change, there's also so many different types of research. You know, we think about policy-based research, we think about the sciences and you know, some of the things that have come out of some of the best, you know, universities. We think about, like you said, getting it into the hands of the right people. What do you think are some of the areas that are most under attack, maybe, and then how can we, you know, be better supporting them?
Well, diversity, equity, and inclusion. You know, and I will say this, every time there's a change in administration, there's a change in priorities. And so that's nothing new, right? When a new administration comes in, they say this is where we're focused our attention and this is not where we're focused our attention. And funding flows follow those priorities. I think that what's different in the current administration is that it's not just about priorities, but it's about saying there are certain things that we simply do not want done at all. And I believe that it is incumbent upon every institution to make decisions about their own values, their set of values, what they believe in, and then standing by those values. And so that's, you know, and I firmly believe that, because not...
I think Steve got some agreement here. Yes, absolutely.
You know, we don't all agree on the same things. And so that's something that we all have to wrestle with. And it really is wrestle with. I am, you know, again, I've been at Brookings only for 6 weeks, and in that time, I've been going around and meeting with the different scholars and different programs and such, and this question of institutional values has come up several times. And what I have said to the scholars is, let's sit around a table and have that conversation. Because my responsibility is to both, and there's a lot of both ands in my life and in, I'm sure, yours as well. My responsibility as a senior vice president is to both uphold the values of this institution and protect this institution. But what that looks like, I don't know. And how to navigate and balance, I don't know. And that's why we have to come together as members of the organization to wrestle with those questions to make sure that we are being true to our values and navigating in a way that will allow us to, right? Because if you keep the lights on, but you can't hold your head up, what's the point? So it really does become, this crazy kind of balancing act, but being true to who you are and what you believe has to be at the center of it. And so I don't tell any organization what they ought to do. I just simply say everybody needs to look within and to make some affirmative decisions about that.
So we've spent a lot of time talking about the research aspect, but I love that in your title was both research and innovation. So obviously the research is a lot of the work, but innovation to me is so optimistic and forward-looking. Like, what is the investment in innovation? And we need that to be competitive globally, but we also need that with all the challenges that we're facing. So how do you create a culture, create a environment that embraces innovation, and how do you invest in that differently than the research to kind of help do that?
Well, you can't be afraid. I think that is, and I say that kind of jokingly, but also in a very serious way, because especially in times of uncertainty, it is very easy to draw in. Because you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. You don't know what next week is going to look like. You know that there are all of these threats in the environment on a number of different fronts. And so there is a very real and logical tendency to draw in. But that's exactly what you cannot do. Because when you do that, you stifle innovation. And to me, innovation is all about dreaming of the possible. What could we be? And dreaming doesn't mean that you're going to do it. But if you stop dreaming, you'll never do anything. So first you dream and think and create and come together and pretend that the world is your oyster and that there are no constraints and that you can, if you can think it, you can do it, right? You just kind of go for it. And then there's always going to be times to come back and say, okay, we don't have any money, or we don't have any people, or we don't have any, right? You could always do that. But first you figure out what is the ideal place that you want to be. Because sometimes in that dreaming, you realize that there is some donor out there, some benefactor, some partner, some other entity who is willing to dream with you and open resources of all different types that you didn't know you would even have access to.
I mean, it is the old adage, you don't get what you don't ask for, right? So you have to be bold in that innovation. And I imagine you've done so much research over your career as well in trying to get innovation investment. Sometimes that happens, but you can't stop asking the question, right?
Right.
Yeah.
You can't stop asking the question, and you have to recognize that not everybody is in the same place at the same time. So somebody may not be interested in the questions that you are asking today, but that doesn't mean that they won't be interested in those questions tomorrow. And it doesn't mean that you won't meet someone tomorrow who has been asking those same questions and looking for you. You just didn't know. So that's why, I always go back to, and, I've done a lot of introducing myself in the last 6 weeks, right? And I've told the story of my grandmother about 85 times. Because I always go back to that. Because I didn't do it because it was the right thing to do. It was what people told me to do. It was the popular thing to say. It was the... that's not why I walked down the path that I walked down. I walked down the path that I walked down because that's where my passion was and that's what I believed in. And I said, either people will care or they won't. I don't care because I'm doing this because I believe in it.
It's interesting. I've never really considered this as research as an investment in people, but that's really at the other end of it, that's what it is. When you talk about community, when you talk about that. I mean, how aspirational is that? Okay, a little unfair. Everybody should get some questions ready because we're gonna grill Dr. Burley a little bit. Like, you get to ask your questions too, but it's kind of unfair. I want you to take out a little bit of a crystal ball here and think about, is there a single reform or one of reforms that could most strengthen the U.S. research and innovation ecosystem in the next decade? Knowing your experience in technology, knowing your experience in research, is there some kind of reform that could strengthen it going forward?
You mean beyond money, right?
Well, money is up there, and obviously resources is a huge part of it. Mm-hmm. But is there any other things that could happen?
I think that we have to, and there's no easy answer to this, and it's not necessarily the external world. I think this is something we have to do together. So we really have to figure out impact. What does impact really mean?
What does it mean? I struggle with that in my own program. Like,
yes.
How do we show that?
How do we show it, right? And I shy away from saying measuring because I'm not convinced that when we say how do we measure impact, that it doesn't skew too far to the quantitative, okay, there's 15 different things we can check the box on. But how do we really talk about impact? What does that look like? What does that mean? I think if we could figure that out, we could then begin to tell stories in a way that really illustrates what we're doing. And so that is something I think that as a community of researchers, we need to spend more time thinking about.
That's interesting. So it's not just the quantitative, but the qualitative, the storytelling about what happens can actually influence, and then it goes back to the resources that get back to more work.
Because, absolutely, because, research is not linear. And the impact is not linear, and it doesn't matter whether the project was funded for a year or 7 years, the quantitatively measured impact may not be visible for 50, right? I mean, it really does vary, and so you have to think about, given that, we don't want to reduce ourselves to simply saying, okay, well, there were 15 pieces of legislation related to this, or there were 4 journal articles published from that, right? Those are certainly important measures, and they're things to consider, but they're not the total story.
You need both to complete the story. Yeah. Is there a call to action for higher education leaders and policymakers seeking to future-proof American research? Is there anything that we need to ask of them in this moment?
I'm going to go back to what I've said previously, and that is you can't be afraid. Research is about pushing the boundaries. And pushing the boundaries means not being afraid. You're asking questions that people do not know the answer to. That's the whole point. So you can't be back on your back foot. You have to be leaning forward and willing to take chances. And too often, especially in times of uncertainty, we get very conservative in the way that we approach everything. And conservatively approaching research is the death of research. We have to we're the creatives, we're the curious, we're the, let's think about it, let's figure it out. Oh, when you think about science and I go back to science and say, whenever you, quote, fail, right, an experiment fails, it didn't fail, it just reduced the solution set. So keep thinking, keep pushing, keep moving.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll open it up to some of my colleagues in the room. But we've got some future researchers or current researchers in the room, which I see a lot of our students here. What gives you optimism about the next generation of researchers and innovators? I'm sure there's some young people working at Brookings too. Like what makes you hopeful when you see them engaged, and how do we invest in them?
They're not afraid. They are curious. They want to push. They push in ways that are very different than what we push and I push. And they are not bound by what we think are, here's the right pattern, the right structure, the right cadence. And I think that that's wonderful, because that's what we need. We need people to push us and to say, hey, I don't agree with what you're saying. And I'm not afraid to tell you that.
We've got to invest in them.
And we have to invest in them.
Okay, I think Jude's going to help us out today. Who has questions for Dr. Burley on this topic? We've got one right over here, Jude. Hi there.
Hello. Oh.
It's good.
So
I think you can use it. We just want to make sure everybody can hear.
got you. So one of the things I noticed when you talked about bridging research and communities, I thought that was very important. Recently, I attended a hearing, and one of the things that the main question was how do we get farmers and climate change activists in the same room? And usually people think there's a huge disconnect between these two, but they align with the same interests and similar interests. So I guess my another question is, what is the best, how can we put academics and working class people in the same room?
It's such a great question. First, invite them. Sometimes it is as simple as saying, come to this room, come be a part of this conversation. We forget the simple sometimes. But then we also have to realize that when we do get in the same room, we have to respect each other's voices and listen. Academics, researchers, think tankers, we're very good at being the experts in the room. We're not always so good at listening. But in order to truly come together and to be able to move solutions forward, we have to be willing to walk into the rooms together and to engage as equals. We have different areas of expertise, but no one's expertise is more important than anyone else's. I might know research methods. Somebody else knows communication and audience engagement. Somebody else knows what the individuals working in that field, if we're talking about farmers or that business or whatever it is, we all have experience and expertise in something. And each one of those pieces is critical to us being able to come up with that next great thing. So it starts with inviting, having conversations, and building respect between the parties.
Next question. Oh, I think we've got one over here. Robin's got one. Thanks, Robin.
Hello, my name is Robin Okano. I'm an MPP student here, so I was never a research person. In fact, I was wanting to be a marine biologist as a kid, and then I realized how much research is involved. Like, it's basically a research, and I was like, that sounds terrible, do not want to be part of that. And now I've recently started my MPP degree, and I'm sure, as you know, at American, it's a very quant-heavy degree. And I chose this on purpose because I realized in my previous role that I was doing a lot of advising with youth climate activists, and we always got down to talking about policy. And so I just kind of wanted to put my money where my mouth is and end up in that space a little bit. And I wanted to ask you about the bridge from research to policy, and something that I'm going through now as an MPP student, and I think speaking for all the students in the room, We look at data sets, we look at research, we have these questions, we're constantly curious, we use our personal experiences to guide our research, and then it gets to solutions time, and we have to start coming up with how to apply the results of our research. And I would just love to hear your perspective about that in all of your different roles, but especially at Brookings Institution, where I'm sure a lot of us are citing some of our findings currently in school.
I hope so. Thank you. First, let me say, there is no expectation that expertise in the entire pathway lies in a single person. You don't have to become an expert in formulating the question, designing the research, conducting the research, applying the research, translating the research, right? That there is no expectation that one person can do it all. It really comes down to having a team and making sure that all of the bases are covered in the team in order to really move the agenda forward, and recognizing that sometimes the team all works together and sometimes it's more like a relay team where you're handing it off to the next person and you're watching, right? When you see the 4x100, that first leg, they don't keep running with the person at the anchor. They stop and stand on the track and watch, right? They're very invested, but that's not their part of the race. And so it's important that you understand the entirety, that you have shared goals, but that you don't try to do it all on your own. Because the team really does have to take it forward. And I will say too that in the beginning of the research, or as you're developing your question or what have you, it's important to engage the end, because you may be formulating your research in a way that is not relevant to what they're actually trying to do. And that may or may not be okay, depending on what your goals are, but you at least want to be informed.
I think it's so important too when you think about this, because we're all researchers in some way. Even if we don't pursue that as a career, there's so much about, at any point, if you're going into higher ed, or even if you decide not to go into higher ed, there's some aspect about our lives that we are researching something. So those fundamental skills should be a part of all of our lives.
They have to be. And I used to teach MPP students, not here, well, a little bit here, but at other institutions, and I taught statistics. And statistics is one of those courses that you either love and you're so thrilled because you're going to be a researcher, or you hate and you're like, why do I have to sit in this room? Because I'm not going to be a researcher. And what I would tell my students is, I don't care whether you want to be a researcher or not. That's not why we're teaching this course. We're in this course because even if you are going to be a city manager, a legislator, the head of a particular division, someone is going to walk into your office and tell you something. They might hand you a chart, they might hand you a table to say why they're telling you, or they might not. But they are going to be using research to support whatever recommendation they're making, and you need to know enough to be dangerous. You need to know enough to say, something doesn't look right, or I'm not sure about that. And to pose the kinds of questions that allow you to actually move that ball forward. So everyone has to think about research from some vantage point.
I just, while we're having somebody formulate the next question, I just want to interject for 1 second. What's interesting is so often we're in DC, we think about the federal government and and what they're doing and how they have access to information. How important is research and how much does Brookings do, like on the local level as well, for some of these communities? Because you said community who don't have access to 10 staff in their office, or, like how important is getting research information to the city council person or the state legislator or the county legislator? What's that pipeline and how important is that so that they can make informed decisions too?
That's vitally important. And I will tell you, so Brookings has 5 divisions, and one of our divisions is called Brookings Metro. And their entire focus is on the local, state, tribal governments, and really conducting research that doesn't just sit inside DC, just inside the Beltway, but actually going out and engaging communities across the country on these critical questions. So that's a very important part of our work. It may not be what often people think about when they think about Brookings, but it is one of our core divisions.
It's always interesting to me, that divide, the people who can afford sometimes the research and then like the people who need, to have access. And we talked about the funding. So it's so great to hear Brookings have that critical part of it, and some of the research that's also happening here on AU's campus to get that into the hands of. Who's got the next question? Jude will come find you. Do we have one over? I think you're just so brilliant. They're all, What are your thoughts about, it's only been 6 weeks, I know, but is there a big divide between being on a university campus and then being in a think tank? Like, is there, just curious for people who, are in the room who are considering, either or kind of thing.
Well, there are no students, so that is a big difference. I think that in terms of the scholars and the way that they work, everything is very focused on impact and on impacting policy. That is our primary audience. And so while at the university, there may be research, and there is obviously research that is conducted that is more basic than applied. So it's, really laboratory based, or it's applied, but not necessarily focused on informing policy. At a think tank, our audience are decision makers and in the policy and landscape. And so whether local, state, federal, or even global issues, because we deal with those too, the research is very focused on how do we get this research into some kind of influence environment to help shape public policy.
And just curious, like you've been on the end of, how important is it the pitch to get investment in what you're doing in research? Like, what do people look for to say, oh, that's a good, what do you have to create to get them invested in that when you're thinking about a project at Brookings or when you were at a university trying to get people to invest in your research idea?
Well, you want to meet people where they are, always. And that applies to whether you're talking to someone about something you happen to see on television or you're trying to get someone interested in investing in your research. People have ideas and they have passions and they have interests and they have particular issues that they care a lot about. And part of getting them to fund the research that you're doing is about appealing to those passions and those interests and those issue areas that they have, and helping them to see what you can do to contribute to understanding in that space and how what they are offering can actually help to move the ball forward. So it's about engaging people and understanding their passions and then helping them to see how collaborating with you can actually move the ball forward. And it really is a collaboration. It's not a give me money. It's not a throw funds or throw resources over the transom and go away and I'm gonna go do my thing. It really is, or the way that I think about it and that I believe is the right way to think about it, is that we are all partners. And the particular role that a sponsor plays is in providing the resources to support the conduct, the activity, the individuals who are engaged in that activity, but they're no less a member of the research team. They just have a very different role.
I think, let me ask you this before we leave, and thank you again so much for your time, but I'm very curious, and one of the panels that we're doing this afternoon is about AI and environmental sustainability. COGOT is, our business school is hosting it. And you see it every day, what is the role of technology and emerging things like AI? What effect is that having on the research community? How do we embrace that going forward? And what are some of the challenges that you think have created for organizations like Brookings or higher ed that want to, still be the thought leader, still producing really good research for people to use?
Yeah, AI and other emerging technologies are disrupting the research space just like they're disrupting every other space. And so we are wrestling with, and as a technologist, I think it's great because this is how I have built my career, right? Is always thinking about, okay, the technology is disrupting the space. So what does that mean for the way that we do our work? What does that mean for the way that we train our people? What does this mean for the way that we think about our work? Not just do our work, but think about it. Because while the technologies will take certain tasks away and say, hey, these tasks are no longer necessary for an individual to do because this particular LLM or what have you can do it, that means that there's more space for us to think about something else, right? So how do we make those adjustments? And how do we level up our activity and our work? And so I think that it represents an opportunity both in terms of the topics that we are exploring. Part of our job as a think tank is to think about how society is engaging with these new tools. But the other part of our job is to think internally about how this evolves a think tank, and how this manifests in the work that we do in order to make our work better.
Well, why don't we just do one final thought from you on your research, peers in the room, but for the future research. What is your final thoughts on what's most important and what we should focus on going forward?
I say continue to focus on curiosity and on pushing boundaries without fear. There's always time to pull back based on constraints, but if you start off with constraints, you'll never push forward as far as you could have. And so I just encourage you all to think big and to really push those boundaries. And don't be afraid. Recognize that even when you're the only voice in a room that is saying the things that you're saying, say them. Because if you don't, who will? And so I just encourage you to continue to push forward and embrace change, never stop learning, and be excited.
Well, I have to say, Brookings is certainly very, very lucky. And we miss you here at American University, but we want to thank you for the mark that you left here, the investment that you made while you were here. You are always welcome back, and we thank you for your time today. Can we all thank Dr. Burley for her conversation with us? And we do have a couple more panels today. I think, certainly we find different ways at AU to partner with Brookings. I know we'll have you back. Only 6 weeks and you're so well versed on what's going on over there. So we'll have you back after you're a little bit more immersed. But for now, we're gonna take just a short break while we reset the stage for our next panel. So please get another drink, talk to some of the colleagues in the room you might not have talked to yet, and we will continue to invite you back again. Thank you, Dr. Burley. Thanks, everybody.